Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Homeschool Minnesota. This podcast is an outreach of Minnesota Association of Christian Home Educators, MACHE. We're so glad that you joined us today. So if you guys have been following the podcast for the past, this whole summer, really, I had kind of a plan of how I wanted it to go, and God said, nope, we're going to go this direction. So you all must be, as much as me, needing to hear about discipleship. And so lately we've been focusing a lot on that and the way we disciple our family, the way we connect with other believers in the world around us, the way that we receive discipleship. All those things have been like topics of conversation for us. And all the books that we've talked about and all the people that we've talked to have been so good and I've said over and over again that they are great reads and would be amazing in a group. But this book, Landscapes of the Soul, is different. It's not different in that it's not good. It's not different in that it's not challenging or about discipleship, but it's different in that it could work for a group. But what I really see it working for is a husband and wife sitting together and going through it together and really getting honest with each other about the way that they see themselves and the way that they process information. And I call it a slow marinating read. I started reading this book and usually I read these books and it's like one of these things where I can get through it pretty quick, but this one's no, I can't. I got through, I think I'm the first third of it. It's still like, yeah, I need to stop because there's a lot of processing that happens after each chapter. We're going to talk all about that, but I really hope that God is really working with you in discipling our kids. I think it's not a mistake that God is bringing us to that topic in this podcast, because if you're looking at the world around us, our kids more than ever need a solid foundation. Our families need a solid foundation. And so the fact that God is really hammering us with discipleship and biblical things is probably his way of gently leading us into what it is that we're going to be seeing in the next few years, because that's how God rolls. And so anyways, I just want to introduce and welcome the authors of this book, Landscape of the Soul, to Dr. Geoff Holsclaw. Is it Holsclaw? Did I get that right?
Holsclaw, yeah, you got it.
And his wife, Sid Holsclaw. And I just want to welcome you guys. They are homeschooling parents, so they know you guys. They get where you're coming from. So welcome, you guys. How are you doing today?
Great. The sun is shining. We get to have a good conversation. It's beginning of fall. It's a great day.
It could be a lot worse, couldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can you guys tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Well, we have been married for 25 years now, and we launched our first child out of the nest a couple years ago. He is 22 years old, and he and his wife got married last year. And he's a housing contractor for a construction company. And our younger son is just turning 21 this fall, and he is a junior in college at a local university. So that's what our sort of nesting life looks like. The younger one moved back home with us while he's going to school. He was away for the first few years, and now he's back. And we are co-pastors, on sabbatical at a vineyard church here in Grand Rapids. And we do a ministry together called the Center for Embodied Faith. And we also co-direct a Doctor of Ministry program at Western Theological Seminary.
Wow.
So that's kind of a snapshot of us.
Y'all are busy people.
Aren't all homeschoolers busy?
I think
people?
we're type A
Right.
personalities, right? Like, what more could we take on? Let's just take on the world. Yeah, we wonder where our kids get it. I'm so excited to have y'all here. Landscapes of the Soul. Can you guys maybe talk to us a little bit about what is a landscape? What does that mean?
Yeah, well, we were trying to pull from attachment theory as kind of the science, which it's a whole backstory, but it really dovetails so perfectly with the story of Scripture that our relationship with God, but also our relationship with our parents are so fundamental in shaping us, shaping how we see the world. And we see that as God making us for both intimacy and independence. And it kind of creates this grid. If you think of like four little parts of a grid, like one kind of vector. What's the right word, Sid? I got
the Cartesian coordinate plane is.
There we go.
Yeah.
The Cartesian coordinate plane. So one coordinate would be intimacy, our capacity for intimacy, and how God made us to commune with Him, to commune with others, to be vulnerable, intimate, open, close with other people. But then God also gave us this wonderful capacity of freedom, of independence, of the ability to go out into the world, to discover new things, create new things. And so that's the other kind of part of the plane there. But the trouble is when we, get stuck, when we fall into sin, when we have relational environments that maybe shape us, and kind of warp us. In certain ways, we end up prioritizing either intimacy or independence. And so that's kind of where the four kind of places come from. So do you want to jump in and explain maybe
Yeah, we called
the
them
three?
landscapes because, especially in our pastoral experience, I'm also a coach and a spiritual director. And so in our experience of being with people, and I know this was true in our marriage too, it was like, I think we all kind of have this experience of the people that we live close to or the people that we live in close proximity or relationship with. It's like, how is it that we see the world so fundamentally differently from each other?
Yeah.
Like when I see this situation, this is my response. And when you see the same situation, you're seeing something different. And so that also, we were noticing that happens in our discipleship pathways too, in our life with God, where it's like, I think of this and this is important to me. And these are the things that are really helpful for me. But then for someone else, you give them, these are the same tools that work for me in connecting with God. And that person is like, I'm lost. I can't, that doesn't work for me. And so this idea of we fundamentally live in these places that feel like they're different territories. So we used landscapes because it was like this kind of sticky idea of if you're living in a jungle, you have the survival tools that you need in a jungle. And if you're living in a desert, you have the survival tools that you need living in a desert, and they're very different. And so someone living in a desert is going to be looking for different things, thinking about different things, planning for different things than someone in a jungle who might be more reacting and responding to the environment that's always changing. And so we landed on that idea of landscapes to help people get this sense of like, oh, we are sort of, it's as if I'm living in a different landscape than you are. And that's why we see things so differently.
Yeah, that just makes so much sense. And as you read the book, excuse me, you start to see all the different ways that you respond to things. And then you start to go, oh, my husband responds this way. And my
Mhm.
oldest child responds this way. And it's just fascinating because I start to realize, oh my goodness, no wonder we butt heads at times. And no wonder I'm always like, why don't you just see this? I don't understand why you don't understand this. And anyway, I just find it's just really good, you guys. Go ahead, Geoff.
A real practical example would be the bedtime routine.
Yes.
I'm sure no one else has struggled with a consistent bedtime routine, but Sid and I will just bare our souls. Sid's more in the jungle, right? So she prioritizes, especially early, when we had young kids. And, she would prioritize the relationships. That's kind of what the jungle is about. You're always scanning for like the relationships and being focused on intimacy. And so
Yeah.
she would really want to be with the kids, right? And she's really attuned to their hopes and fears. And I am more in what we'd call the desert, which is focused on like the rules, right? And so when we had decided the night before, the week before, the month before, like this is how bedtime's going to go. It's going to go like this, and this is the routine. This is the rules. Then, so I would do that if I'm in charge of bedtime. I would do it, and then you read one book and you're out, right? I'm trying to get back to my desert, back to my alone time. But Sid in the jungle, she's like, the kids want to read one more board book. Like we could do that. Oh, we could do even one more after the one more, right? And so
We're
the relationship,
snuggling and they're sitting on my lap and it's so
right.
sweet.
And so it's like the relationship is more important than the rule we set down. And we look at each other like we're aliens because I'm like, you're not following the rule. How could you? And she looks back at me like, you're so hard-hearted. Like we're having a good time. How could you stop it? Right. And it's because we see the world kind of from this different matrix, from those different lenses. So I'm sure we're not the only ones who have had those kind of fights and conflicts.
It's so true. And I like how you started out the book. Sid talks about a story where she was waiting for Geoff and it took him longer. Can you talk a little bit about that and just kind of when you guys realize the dynamics are so different between the two of you?
Yeah. Well, it was, I think we'd only been married for less than a year at that point because I was still in my training for this new job. And we had one car because, we were poor seminary students trying to make the dollars stretch.
Mm-hmm.
And it was before cell phones. And so Geoff was going to come and pick me up. And I had changed buildings because I was still training and, didn't get the message across. So he went to the wrong building to pick me up, which meant that I was waiting for him it was probably only about a half an hour. But in my mind, there was a whole progression of things that happened. So I was waiting for him. And at first I was, just chatting and like, no big deal. And then he got later and later and later. And I started rehearsing all these, like, he must be dead. Like something happened to him, something terrible happened to him, and he's never going to pick me up. And so now I need to start planning for my future. And I need to start thinking about what am I going to do now that my husband has died. But then on the flip side, I was also like doing the like, don't be ridiculous. He's not dead. He's just late. It's not a big deal. And sort of going back and
Yeah.
forth. But I mean, eventually, by the time he arrived, I was like, I could barely speak. My whole body was just in a panic. I could like just kind of shut down. And really, what that was doing is it was touching on this underlying message, the way that I saw the world, which was I have to keep my people close at all times because at any moment I could lose any one of them.
Yeah.
And that came out of the story of having lost my father when I was just a little tiny girl in a car accident. And then my mother had died suddenly just a year before we got married. I mean, the year we got married, she had died just a couple months before we got married. And so I just sort of had this like, relationships are fragile. I need to hang on to them at all times, at all costs. And so going back to what Geoff was talking about with that intimacy and independence dynamics, mine was like, I prioritize intimacy at the expense of independence. So I will never follow a rule or a pattern if it means that it would compromise the intimacy I have with this person or if it would sacrifice the relationship. I mean, that's the way it used to be. Not anymore, but that's the way it used to be. And so that was sort of that was a very revealing moment for both of us of like, something is not okay in me that I could have this big of a crisis over you being 30 minutes late to pick me up.
Yeah. And I think about that, and you talk you start out the book and you say that we can get stuck in our spiritual lives at some point, like with just where we're at. And why does that happen and how do we fix that?
Well, I think we get stuck in our spiritual lives for the reasons Sid was kind of outlining is something happens to us or we are in a relational environment and it gets internalized, it gets ingrained in us how to survive that environment. And so like, where does this landscape that we call the jungle, where does that come from? Well, it kind of comes from inconsistent parenting, and maybe there was like a death. And so all of a sudden things were different or a tragic illness, but something where the message that the children are receiving is sometimes my needs, especially my emotional needs, are met and sometimes they're not. And so I have to pay attention. I have to be really vigilant about my relationships. And so that's a survival strategy that kind of develops into your own internal jungle. And it suited you to help you survive. And surviving is good. And this is kind of the main point of a part of the book is like, God has made us to survive and surviving is good. But we can kind of get stuck in some of those survival strategies and they can get warped by sin. And so someone in the desert has an opposite experience where they really were left on their own and their social and especially their emotional, their heart as a young child was kind of ignored or neglected and sometimes outright rejected. And so they kind of started hiding that part of their heart from themselves even, right? Because it was too painful to kind of like be rejected again. And so that kind of develops into a desert. And that was a way to survive that time and space. But then as we grow, as we develop, as we enter into new relationships, as we become parents ourselves, then those survival strategies we worked out as children, all of a sudden we're like, this is not working. And I don't know why it's not working, but it's just like, it's bad. And I feel stuck and I don't know how to get unstuck. And it's because our whole way of seeing the world has been shaped by this landscape. So, and then we also, that happens in our spiritual lives. So like our parenting, our marriage, our spiritual life, the book is really written about our spiritual life, but it's super easy, as you just mentioned, it's super easy to connect it to like, well, what would this look like in my marriage? And what might this look like in my parenting? And so it kind of works on all those different levels.
Yeah. And at the end of each section of your book chapter, not even every chapter, but every section area, there's like really good thought-provoking questions that I love those. And I'm generally not one who gets into the deep part of my psyche or my heart or whatever it is, that everybody likes to dig into. My husband, there's this old game called the Ungame. Do y'all remember the Ungame?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
We had it in my house growing up too. Yeah.
My husband loves that game. And he's like, let's play the Ungame. And he'll we've got all the cards. He's collected them over the years. And he would pull them out like at family things or whatever with our kids. And we and I'd be like, do we have
Not
to
the
play
Ungame?
the Ungame? I mean, my word, how much do I need to know about you people? No, it's just like hard for me to get very like vulnerable in a lot of ways with people.
Mhm.
I love it when people get vulnerable with me, but it's really hard for me to do that with them. And I don't know why. I mean, I'm still figuring out your book is gonna help me with that, I'm thinking. But, anyways, I'm thinking about, like, trauma and coping skills as a child, things that you had when you were a kid or even as an adult. I mean, we all have things that we use for coping skills and trauma, and some of them are healthy, some of them are not. Survival skills, I guess, and to get through those tough times and those times when you just have to plow through whatever's going on in your life. Do those always stay with us? Can we unlearn those, and how do we unlearn those?
We can
Mm.
absolutely unlearn
Isn't that
those, and that's
wonderful?
why yeah, it's
Well,
such
so
good
we
news.
actually say we don't have to unlearn them. We just need to integrate them.
There
We
we
kind of
go.
need to add. We
Yeah, that's definitely, there's so much hope because it's like these, but the thing is that the difference that it makes is that at the beginning, it's like we're not aware of the survival skills, of the survival strategies. And so it's when we can become aware of those. And that's
Mhm,
part of what we're doing in our book is trying to help you see like these are actually great skills that you developed out of your need to survive. The trouble is that they're out of balance. And
mhm.
so you're stuck with these skills that you're always using, even when it's not appropriate. And what you need to do is shore up another set of skills that can balance those so that you can become integrated in both intimacy and independence. And so, but yes, strategies can be changed. I mean, everything we've learned about the brain is, there's neuroplasticity in the
Yeah.
brain, and God, we can literally be transformed by the renewing of our minds and just being able to become aware of what the strategies are that we're using and then consciously practice adopting new ones, and working with our bodies too. Like our bodies are responding to different situations and environments based out of the
Yeah.
trauma we may have experienced. And so being able to work with our bodies to settle and calm ourselves so that we can be more resourceful in our thinking and not just reactive. So, yes, you can absolutely change your strategies and you can absolutely integrate and grow. We like the landscape that we are all wanting to get to is the one that Jesus invites us all into, which is
Mhm.
the pasture,
Yeah.
which is that place with the good shepherd where we truly lack nothing and we have nothing to fear because the good shepherd is with us.
That sounds so good. You see, you talked just a brief second about when we focus on our, like our brains and how we have to retrain them and renew them. In your book, you talk about how when we focus on our problems, our brains are not open to change. Can you talk about a little bit about why that is?
Yeah. So there's actually, I mean, if you want to get sciencey, there's these two networks in your brain. And this is the work by Richard Boyatzis, is the guy that I learned it from, where you have this positive emotional attractor is one system in your brain. It's one network. And the other network is the negative emotional attractor. And they sort of say what they say, right? And the
Mhm.
negative one is the one that you use whenever you're moving into problem solving or getting a task completed or being very, looking step oriented. I mean, as homeschoolers, we use that one a lot.
Yes.
It's sort of like, okay, here's the weakness. How do I shore it up? What's the plan?
Mhm.
How do I develop it? And if you're doing math problems, you're in that negative emotional attractor. It's a task
Yeah.
place. But then there's also this positive emotional attractor system, which is the thing that draws you toward what is good and beautiful and right and lovely. And I know that when I was homeschooling, that's why I wanted to put beautiful art in front of my kids.
Yeah.
That's why I want to reveal, like a compelling vision for what is good and true and beautiful. And, I mean, God does that too. He lays before us, this is what I have called you into. Here is the kingdom that is coming. This is what I'm asking you to live into. And so that draws us toward the source of life. The negative emotional attractor sort of pushes us away from what we don't want to have. And so when you're in that negative emotional attractor space, you're in a very sort of targeted, task focused. It's almost like you've got tunnel vision to solve the problem. But when you're in that positive emotional attractor, the world is wide open, it's
Yeah.
expansive, you're open to resources, you feel creative. And so that's the place that we want to be drawn into. And that's why we start our book with, that first chapter is sort of an explanation of trauma and how it gets stuck and how we end up where we get up. But then that we move immediately from there into God's good design for our bodies, for our families, for our attachments, and for our relationship with Him. And like what we're trying to do in that first section is create such a compelling vision of what is possible
Yeah.
that then that gives you the courage to keep reading
Yeah.
the part of what went wrong and how do you move through that.
Yeah.
But it's that compelling vision that really helps us.
Mm.
That's where lasting change comes from, is moving toward a compelling vision rather than getting away from the things that are the problem.
You know, I think that sometimes we as Christians and we want God to be our foundation. We want him. We want to be completely grafted into the vine, right? That's like the goal of that's what we're
Mhm.
supposed to be. And so that we can bear good fruit and we don't die and wither and just get cast away. So I think about that. What does it mean? What does it look like? Just give us, because this is something that you do talk about, and it's something that does keep you reading because you realize I really want that, but I don't have that yet. So what does it look like
Hmm.
to be fully rooted in God? What is
Mm.
what, instead of just kind of partially in and out, or just what does it look like?
Well, I'll let Sid jump in on what exactly it looks like, but I want to answer, well, how do we get there? So when, as kids, we're talking about intimacy, independence, we're talking about these landscapes. Well, how do they get formed? Well, when you really break it down, like we're all little scientists when we're children.
Yeah.
We're all running experiments about how intimacy works. How is my caregiver, my parent, my loved one, even my siblings going to respond to me if I do this? How does the world react when I do that? So the intimacy and independence. And so if you just think of mealtime for another high powered situation, with little toddlers, little kids, they're in the high chair, you're giving them food, and what happens? It's flying everywhere, right? Or it's they knock the bottle off and then someone puts it back on and they're like, well, the bottle came back to me. Let's see if the bottle will come back to me again, right? You're
And
running
it
an
becomes a
experiment.
game and you're just like dying.
Exactly. It becomes a game. And so that's fun, or it's not fun because now there's an angry voice.
Fun
So
for
I
the
learned something.
child.
Yeah. Right. And so the child is always gaining data that then they're creating into, the fancy word is like a mental model, right? But you just have this understanding of the world and your place in it and how people work. So, and I'm getting to the answer. So, but the life of faith is the same way. And so we try to think of faith as running new experiments. It's not just ideas about who God is and then trying really hard to believe them. It's actually like putting something out into the world, which is, I feel sad, so maybe I'm going to talk to God about that. Or I'm feeling overwhelmed, and so I'm going to pray about that. Or I'm going to share that with somebody. Or, I'm going to try to, you know, go to that Bible study that I always find a reason not to go to. Or I'm just going to read scripture today. So you're running new experiments, and you're trusting God. And so faith allows us to gather this data that then kind of gets stored up as like hope, like things can be different. And then that starts forming God's love in us. And so it kind of starts with faith and then moves into hope and then grows in love. And so that's kind of the process that we talk about a little bit. Sid, what is it? What do you think it looks like?
Yeah,
Or
what
how
does
would
it
you put?
look like to get to like be in the pasture in that place where God designed for us would be to have a strong sense of God's gladness to be with us. Like he doesn't just put up with us, he doesn't just tolerate us, he actually delights in us and wants to be with us. So we would experience that joy. And then, in that we also experience this sort of circle of security, to borrow language from the attachment research, of this idea of like we have this intimacy with God, we can be close and connected. We know that he is the source of comfort whenever we're upset or distressed or anything like that. But then we also have this sending forth, right? Jesus sent his disciples out 2 by 2 to go and do everything that he had taught them to do. And he didn't go along with them. He just said, you go do it. And then they came back to him and told him about how it went wrong and how it went right. And they received his comfort and he gave them courage and he sent them out again, right? So that back and forth cycle. And, hopefully we're doing with that with our kids. As we're incubating all of this intimacy in our homes, we're also sending them out into the world and saying, you have what it takes.
Yeah.
Like, go ahead, go out there. Like you're equipped, you're ready. And then when something happens out there that found they weren't ready for, they can come back to us and say, this is what happened. And we can comfort them and we can attune to them. And then we can help them narrate it and work through it. And we can send them back out again. And that's how it works with God too. And then also, within that, these internalized beliefs that we have that Geoff mentioned is that, when we're in the pasture and we're living in the security of that connection with God, we have this sense that God is always available to me and any distress that I experience is going to be alleviated basically because he's present to me is the biggest reason that distress is alleviated. I'm never alone in this, but also that God is always working to make all things new. And so even if I can't see it right now, God is at work doing something here that I can't yet see. And then that's that hope. And then the last piece is that, and God has given me the agency, like he's given me the authority as a child child of God and as an ambassador of the kingdom of God to go and to love others in his name. And so that's, this strong sense of I have a purpose. Like I'm part of the family of God, but I also get to go be part of the family business of God. And I get to go and participate in God's love in the world. And so that's how that's how we describe in the book. That's what life in the pasture is all about.
Yeah, it sounds really good. I think about you talk about attachment theory a little bit and how it relates to us as believers, with our relationship with the Lord. But you also talk in the book about distorted attachments. Can you tell us a little bit
Mhm.
about distorted how those come about, and then how do we overcome those things?
Well, they come about basically in sort of the reverse of what I was just describing, right? So
Mm,
when we're growing up in our homes, that's what we're designed to experience as children,
mm,
is that exact dynamic that I was describing. But the reality is not all of us do. And I know I'm talking to a bunch of homeschool parents, and you are doing your absolute best.
absolutely.
And I know part of the reason you homeschooled is because family is so important to you and because your children are so important to you and you want to raise them well. And, but none of us can be perfect no matter how hard we try. And none of us can be entirely consistent all the time. And so the way that attachment can get distorted is like, so going from my story, my dad died when I was only 15 months old. And so my mom was grieving while raising two kids and doing her absolute best, but she just couldn't possibly be as emotionally available to me as I needed as a little kid because she just was overwhelmed with her own grief. And then having to sort of, shove her own emotions aside to keep doing what she needed to do, which then made it harder for her to handle my emotions. And so there's just this cycle, and it can happen when a parent gets ill. It can happen when, maybe a new baby is born and that baby has a little bit more needs than were anticipated, or if you have a family, special needs in the house. All kinds of things can come up, which makes the parent a little like less consistent. Where it's like so my experience was my mom was sometimes really tuned into my needs and was entirely there for me. And then at other times, it was like she was numb and shut down and somewhere else. And I needed to try to ramp up, engage in bad behavior or whatever to try to get her attention. And then when I did get her attention, it wasn't always pleasant because of the things I had done to get her attention. Right. And so that inconsistent caregiving environment then creates that sort of hypervigilance that I described of this, like, I have to keep my people close and I have to watch my people all the time to make sure I'm staying connected. And that's that prioritization of the intimacy. And that comes out of a belief that people are available when I get their attention, or people are available when they're in the right mood. So I have to watch their mood and I have to know when the moment is going to be right so I can get their attention, because only then will my distress be alleviated by my caregiver. And so I'm using all of my agency or all of my power to watch my relationships and make sure that everything's going to go okay. And that's that distortion of the jungle. And then, Geoff, do you want to talk about the desert or do you want me to keep going?
Yeah. Well, like so that's one way to kind of develop a distorted attachment where you're prioritizing the intimacy, the relationships. And then you also get the opposite reaction where you have a distorted kind of attachment to your own independence. And that really is a way of protecting your heart against future disappointments in relationships. Is that I've, for whatever reason, I've gotten these signals from those who love me that they love part of me, but not like all of me. And
Mm,
that part of me is like my heart or that vulnerability or maybe some sadness or something. Right. So then I learned to hide that. And in the process of learning to hide that, even from myself, like I'm not just hiding it from others, I'm hiding it from myself. And that's where kind of the desert slowly starts to grow, where then you kind of have this distorted attachment to independence. It's like, well, I'm on my own. I can do things really well. And sometimes that looks like the child who you don't have to bother with as much because they are very independent. They like to play by themselves. So it's like, you play by yourself because I have other things to do, or I can finally clean, right? And so it becomes this kind of self-feeding loop where that kind of attachment to independence. It really, God wants us to have access to both of those skills and both those capacities. But that only comes by having a properly ordered attachment, to God,
yeah.
so that we're not finding our sense of value in the relationships we have. We're not finding our sense of value in the things we do or things we can build or the grades we get or something like that, right? But we find our value in that relationship. And then those other two things can kind of function properly in our lives instead of becoming distorted by sin.
Yeah, I love that. So, as parents, looking to disciple our families and looking to disciple our kids, and I think the first answer is that we need to deal with our own attachment to the Lord and our own relationship rooted in God. And what does that actually look like? And then allow Him to kind of work through us. But how do we then raise our kids so that they can live in the pasture?
Hmm.
Well, Sid, do you want to talk about joy or rupture and repair? Or were you about to say something different?
You go ahead and talk about which one you want to talk about, and then I'll go next.
Well, so I'll talk about rupture and repair. And this can be the parents' work at the same time as helping kids. And
Yeah.
Sid can feel the same because she did it so well. But the reality is no one's perfectly in tune with their child or their spouse or even
No.
anybody, right? It's just impossible to always be anticipating or understanding the needs or just even the general situation. Kids get hormones and they're just, they're weird sometimes.
Yeah.
They're just doing their own thing, right? So there's going to be ruptures
Yeah.
that aren't necessarily sinful, but then there are also ruptures that are sinful that need to be repaired. Now, what is that? How does that cultivate secure attachment? Well, when you repair ruptures, for one, you're being honest about the situation. We're not sweeping aside either hurt feelings or bad actions. We're naming what happened, and the people that are involved need to, in a sense, understand that they're acting out of independence, kind of violated maybe some intimacy, some relationships, or something like that, right? But then the repair work of asking forgiveness or just getting on the same page or apologizing or something like that, then long term creates the awareness that I don't have to hide the things that I don't like that happened or that I feel. They're not too big for this thing that we call family. Like family can contain, it can hold on to even the ruptures and that they can be repaired. And so it really does that work. And it does the work so I used to get, back to the rules, right? Rules over relationships is where I'm coming from. So when the kids weren't doing what I thought, what they should be doing in that moment, or they're not finding their shoes quick enough so we can get to church or whatever, right? I would get impatient and then I get angry. And then I would hand out punishments that were excessive to the situation. So what I would have to do, right? So they were causing a rupture, but I was also adding to the rupture based off of my own living in the desert. So I had to start learning to go back to our kids and say, hey, you know what? It was wrong that I yelled at you, and that punishment I gave you was excessive. And so will you forgive me? And we're going to knock that down a couple notches. And so now this is, what it's going to be. And so what does that teach the kids? Like, one, that's hard work for us parents, right? So you have to be able to cultivate that in your heart. But what does that teach the kids? It teaches them, hey, I can step back from a situation. I could look at it somewhat objectively and I can course correct. And like, if dad could do that, I could learn to do that. Right. And that's where that the deepening of relationships, that's where the secure attachment really gets formed, because there's no perfect relationship. There's just ones that get repaired. And when relationships get repaired, then the trust, the vulnerability, all those things can start to grow. And it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. So that's a huge part of developing that secure foundation, that secure attachment. And so, first of all, be free from any idea that you have to do it right and that when you make a mistake, you've blown it. That's not true. Actually, secure attachment is impossible without ruptures that get repaired. So it's the very process of saying you're sorry and repairing those relational ruptures that actually creates the secure attachment. It's not there without it. And then the other thing that's really important is just joy, building a foundation of joy. And so joy, when we're using that, Jim Wilder talks about joy being the experience of being with someone who's glad to be with you. And so it's not just situational happiness, like, oh, everything's going great today, so I feel happy, but it's the joy of, I am so glad that I am in relationship with you, even as we're experiencing conflict, or even as I'm confused or I don't understand you, I'm still so glad that we're in relationship together. And so, just trying to be intentional about cultivating joy, like when kids wake up in the morning and they walk into the kitchen or wherever you might be, or like, even if they're like a sleepy teenager who is not happy to be awake, still being able to just turn to them and say, good morning, or just greeting them with some cheerfulness, or if you're, going somewhere to a homeschool co-op or whatever else, and just be like, I'm so glad we get to do this together.
Yeah.
Or, I'm glad I got to spend the day with you. Just those simple things that don't feel like a big deal create an atmosphere of it's not dependent on how I behave, and it's not dependent on, the things that I can achieve or perform. Mom is glad to be with me, even when I'm not even glad to be with myself because
Mm,
I can't even stand what I'm doing right
it's
now.
true.
And so just really trying to express that
Yeah.
of like, I'm frustrated with you right now, and I'm so glad to be your mom, right? Or I don't really understand what you need right now, and I'm still so glad that you're my son, right? Like just those little things are just really important to sort of shore up that, okay, I don't know what to do right now, but that doesn't mean that I'm not happy to be in relationship with you.
Yeah.
So those are two things right there that I just want to encourage you as parents. Like, it's so important to go back and say you're sorry.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'll raise kids who don't know how to do that. And we actually used to have a little formula in our house where, like, we had it up on the wall where it was like, I'm sorry that I fill in the blank. I realized that when I did that, it cost you blank, or this is how it affected you. And then, I will try to blank in the future. Will you please forgive me?
Mm.
And sort of that. And so we sort of like walked our kids through this formula just to help them understand, like, there's no way you're not going to make mistakes. There's no way you're not going to hurt other people, because that's just, relationships are messy. What you need to do when you do hurt somebody else is acknowledge what it did for them. What was the impact for them? And then just say, like, I'm really sorry, and I'm going to try to do something different in the future.
That's so good. I like you guys. I really do. Um, I can't believe we're at the end of this conversation. Anyway, just for all our listeners, if you are interested in this book right here, Escapists of the Soul, I'm going to have, of course, like always in the description of this podcast, anything that you need to be able to find it and to get it for your family. What a blessing it would be to make this kind of like a course for your homeschooled high school student so that
Mm,
they leave your home and they have a real full self-awareness of where they're coming from. So when they're
yeah.
building relationships as adults outside of your home, they really do know where they're coming from, and they can foster healthy, good attachments that are rooted in God because they're rooted in God. And I just think what a blessing that would be. So man, what a great elective, y'all. It's a great
Yeah.
elective.
Well, and it'd be great for parents too to be able, like, as stuff comes up, to be able to repair any ruptures that you didn't even
Absolutely.
know were there. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, do it before your child leaves home, because what a
Yes.
blessing to them to be able to have that time with you to really get deep in their heart of who they are, and have a real good self-awareness before they head off to college or career or trade school or whatever it
Yeah.
is, life, you know? So
Mhm.
yeah, just a little heads up on how this can be used. I always love to give you guys resources, and these are all the different ways that it can be used. This would be a good one for that, you guys. It would be a really good one. It's not necessarily a co-op class because it's real personal, but it is something you could do with your child in your family. That would be just a really good way for them to connect with you in a very real and vulnerable way, which we all are looking for that with our kids. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you for just the ability to just break everything down so easily and understandable. I really do appreciate it. It's an anointing from God to be able to take a very difficult topic and to make it so accessible. And you all have done that.
Thank
So
you.
thank you so much for that. And
Yeah.
I just appreciate you. For my listeners, like, subscribe, and share. You always got to say that. But also, you all just, yeah, we at Michelle, we love you. We pray for you. We want you to be successful in your homeschooling endeavors. So, you can contact us if you are not from Minnesota, or if you're not a homeschooler, you can still contact us and let us know how you're doing. And if there's anything that you need, we can sure try to help, because first and foremost, we are servants of God. And that's what we do. And so, yeah, we just want to thank you all for listening today. I want to thank you guys for taking time out of your schedules to be with us. And we'll see you all again soon.